I'd like to welcome you all to the Somerset North Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Kathy Pearce, Chair of the committee, and to my right is Councillor Matt Martin, Vice Chair. Just a few housekeeping things first. We're not expecting a fire drill this afternoon, so if the alarm goes off, it's the real thing. Just head out of the double doors to your left and through reception and into King Square. Toilets are also in the reception and there is water to your right. Please help yourself if you would need to. So this meeting is a hybrid meeting, and that means that committee members are present in Bridgewater House, and the meeting is also available online via Teams. Please note that the meeting's been recorded. I'll put them to silent. And can those joining us online please turn off your cameras and microphones so that the meeting isn't disturbed. I'll now introduce those taking part in the committee today. We have some new faces at the table. So we have to my left are members of the legal and democratic teams. Would you just like to introduce yourselves, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Josh. I'm the clerk for Planning North today.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Jones. I'm the legal advisor, solicitor at the council offices.
Thank you. And to my right are planning officers and member of Highways Department. Would you just like to, I know some of you are regulars, but.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Collins. I'm the interim area manager for North and West.
Good afternoon, I'm Amelia Elday, one of the planning officers who covers Area North.
Good afternoon, I'm Emma Meacham, Principal Planning Liaison Officer for the Highways Department.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Louise Newcombe, one of the Principal Planning Officers in the North team.
Thank you. And on the wings of the table are councillors who will debate and decide the applications. The format will be as per the published agenda, and a copy of the officer reports can be found on the council website. Each application will be taken in turn. Officers will outline each application, followed by public speaking time. Only members of the public who have registered to speak can make representation, and councillors around the table will then debate and decide on each application. During the debate, there will be a proposer and a seconder for a resolution. Members will vote on the proposal, and only members who have been present throughout the whole application and debates will be able to vote. Voting options are for, against, abstain and defer. Votes will be counted and the result announced. We'll now go on to the main agenda, and firstly I'd like to ask if there are any apologies for absence, please, Josh.
Thank you, Chair. I have apology from Councillor Hilary Bruce and Councillor Brian Ball.
Thank you. And there are no subs, are there, for either of those?
No, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on to agenda item 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have a proposer and seconder? Okay, that's proposed by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Filmer. That they are correct record. All those in favour, please show. Next, we'll go on to declarations of interest. And can I ask our legal advisor just to take us through and explain why declarations are to be made, and then ask for any declarations, please.
Thank you. In relation to declarations of interest, if a councillor member of the committee believes that they have an interest, they should declare that interest at the meeting. The point about declarations is that there are two types. There are declarations of interest which do not involve any form of predetermination nor bias, and there are other declarations of interest that do definitely involve predetermination and bias. The distinction between the two concepts is in a matter of law as to whether the member in question is approaching the matter with an open mind, i.e. is predisposed, but that's lawful, or in contrast is predetermined against the matter and has a closed mind owing to a significant personal interest. For members of the public, please note that You may hear certain members of the committee announce declarations of interest from time to time. They must do this where they are twin-hatted members, that is, where they are also members of a parish or town council, etc. These are involved in a consultation process with the council, and so may already have had some dealings with the planning application. If the member of the committee has not taken part in the discussions at the other council or parish council, then they can approach the matter with an open mind at this committee, and provided they haven't formed a bias or predetermination of the case, they can take part in today's discussion, debate and vote. Having contrast, if they declare an interest, a direct interest, either pecuniary or direct interest, personal interest, then they cannot speak on the application or continue to take part in the debate, and will have to leave the room and therefore cannot take part in the vote. These are significant, important distinctions. I mean, effectively, the legal test in general terms is whether the fair-minded and informed observer, having considered all of the facts, would conclude that there was a real possibility that any member of the committee was biased. Obviously, provided we follow the relevant procedures as just briefly outlined, then obviously there should be no difficulty in the decisions being made by the planning committee. So there's a broad distinction that provided the members approach the matter with an open mind, then they can carry on. But if they have a closed mind with a direct personal or other material interest, then they cannot participate and have to leave the room. Basically, this planning committee is a quasi-judicial organisation, and as such it has to act fairly. If it doesn't act fairly, then its decisions can be open to challenge. I can explain more if there are any questions on this point, but it's an important distinction to bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I take any declarations? Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Council Chair. First one is a other registered interest as a member of the Act through internal drainage board, but I've taken no part in discussions on their consultations on the planning matters from the area. And the other is agenda item 7, pages 77 to 84. It comes within my division. I attend the parish council meeting, but took no part in the discussion. But I was consulted about whether it should come to committee and asked that it could, but I've come to this committee with an open mind and will listen to debate, make a decision on that.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application on page 77 to 84 in my division, I've taken no part in any discussions on this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
On the Bridge Primary School, as member of the town council, I took no part in any discussions.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. The Axbridge Drainage Board, and number 7, 39 Julian's Acres is only a few streets from me, but I don't know people. I've had no discussions with any person. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slocum.
Thank you. On application agenda item 7 for the land of former Somerset Bridge. I'm a member of the town council, but I'm not on the planning. I've taken no formal discussions with anyone.
Thank you. That's agenda item 6.
What was it, 7 here? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. But noted. Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item number 5. It's in my patch, and I am predetermined on this application, so I'll be leaving the chamber for the duration.
Thank you. I also need to declare an interest on agenda item 6, land at Somerset Bridge Primary School, as a member of Bridgewater Town Council, but I've taken no part in any discussions and come to this unpredetermined. Councillor Smedley.
But I have to say the same, because I'm on Bridgewater Town Council. I've had no to do with this.
Thank you. That takes us to public question time. There are 2 members of the public that have registered to speak, and I'll ask you to come to the table in front of us when we are considering those applications. So that takes us on to the applications, but before we start, I'm sure you've all noticed that there was an error in the published agenda, the papers that went out, in that there was actually no report for the Eastview Monsell Lock North Newton. The previous application had been duplicated. Therefore, as I certainly haven't had a good look at the that application, I am proposing that we defer that application to the next meeting. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Okay, can I just take, I need to take a vote that we all agree with that. No. Did you have a question, councillor Slocum?
I beg your pardon, I kept my hand up.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So that takes it on to the first application of the afternoon, agenda item 5 on pages 21 to 46. And this is land to the southeast of Snakefield Parkland at Wedmore. And this is a deferral from last month's meeting that we that was deferred so that we could understand the licensing agreements further, and for further information on the relationship with the proposed key holder dwelling and locational requirement for the proposed building. Thank you. Millie, would you like to take us through the application, please? Yes, when Councillor Martin's left, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Councillor Pearce has just set out, this application was heard at last month's committee with a vote for deferral to allow for further information to be received in respect of the relationship with the proposed key holder dwelling, the locational requirement for the proposed building, and details of the licensing requirements that require the scale of building proposed. So the application is before members as the officer's recommendation is contrary to the view of the parish council and division member. So a lot of this presentation will be the same as last time. I just realised there's something on the screen, so I'll just get it up. Great. Okay, so these are the main considerations and the policies from the Sedgemoor local plan and the Wedmore neighbourhood plan that are relevant to this scheme. The application site is a grass field located to the southeast of an unclassified road, sited approximately 1.6 kilometres directly from the village centre of Wedmore. The site is accessed via a track that runs along the northeast boundary that also serves the adjacent residential dwelling and the former Girl Guide Centre to the southeast. The application seeks consent for the erection of a building to provide a cattery to allow for an existing business to relocate. The proposed building would be served by a parking area and access onto the existing track that connects to the main highway network. The building is proposed to have a footprint of approximately 45.35 metres by 10 metres, finished with a pitch roof with a ridge height of approximately 3.71 metres. The building is proposed to be finished with corrugated metal sheeting. So these are some views from Google Images as approaching from the southwest. This is from June 23, so it's still quite recent. This is as you carry along Snakefield Lane, the arrow indicating where the application site is. And there's the junction with the access, with the proposed key holder dwelling, you can see in that image as well. And then these are views as you look back once you pass the junction. And then we sort of move on to my photos from my site visit. So this is the track. And then sort of looking along down the track and that boundary site. And that's the application site, that grass field. So briefly considering sort of relevant history. So currently the cattery business is located at the Blue Star site, approximately 1.2 kilometres from the application site. And these are the relevant planning permissions for the existing premises. There are no previous planning consents on the land that is subject to this application. All three of the previously mentioned consents carry these conditions that are listed on the slide that have been imposed to ensure that the cattery business remains part of the New Grove Farm enterprise and to not be used separately from the farm. This is due to the existing cattery site being in the countryside and only considered acceptable as it was a form of rural diversification and took place on site of the farm. Additionally, policy E8, the relevant principal policy at the time of consenting the original category, required any new building to be sited in or adjacent to an existing group of buildings and blend satisfactorily into the landscape in respect of design, siting and materials. So in terms of, so this was the additional information that was received in April following the publication of the April report, but prior to the April committee. So there was some clarification regarding some points. So the adjacent dwelling known as Orchard Paddock Farm is occupied by the landlord of the application site. The agent sets out that a new fit for purpose building is required due to licensing changes and that it would be needed to achieve a rating higher than 3 stars. The current location of the cattery at New Grove Farm is a tenanted farm owned by the Hugh Sexy's estate. The farm is leased by the occupiers of New Grove Farmhouse and Orchard Paddock Farmhouse. The current cattery business set up by the family that tenant the farm, and due to retirement in 2022, a previous employee of the cattery business took the opportunity to rent the premises under a new limited company. The area of land currently used for the cattery is to be used for an alternative farm use. So since the April committee and the vote for deferral, the agent has since submitted an amended location plan to include the adjacent dwelling, Orchard Paddock Farm, within the red line. Additional information has also been provided regarding the locational and licensing requirements. And all of the information that had been received was added to the end of the report as Appendix 1. So the licensing requirements set out that a designated key holder with access to all animal areas should be within a reasonable travel distance of the premises and available to attend in an emergency. It's italicised because that's a direct quote. The licensing requirements also set out that a competent person must be on site at all times. The size of the proposed building has been dictated by the licensing requirements. The search area for alternative sites was based on a 3-mile radius, as 60% of the client base live within this distance. And the agent also sets out within the statement that they consider only premises within the settlement boundaries would be sequentially preferable. So in terms of the principle of development, the application site is outside of any development boundary, and therefore in accordance with policy CO1, development in such locations is strictly controlled unless there is a specific locational requirement and a rural location is needed to facilitate the proposed use. The proposed development relates to an existing business that is seeking to relocate. The existing business premises are currently located adjacent to the Blackford settlement boundary and are in close proximity to other buildings such as New Grove Farmhouse and other agricultural buildings. The existing cattery premises is conditioned to only operate as a form of agricultural diversification at New Grove Farm, and it's considered that the proposed development is significantly distant from the main part of the farm. The originally submitted planning statement sets out that the proposed location is required to allow for a key holder to reside in the adjacent house, Orchard Paddock Farm, located approximately 50 metres from the application site. It's also noted that this property is an agricultural worker dwelling. In terms of the need for such close proximity of an out-of-hours key holder, the agent has set out that this is due to the licensing requirements. However, the licensing requirements only need an out-of-hours key holder to be within a reasonable travel distance. The licensing requirements also set out that there should be a competent person on site, at least on site at all times. Sorry, there's misunderstood something I've written there. Person on site at all times. However, this could be provided by a worker on site that does not rely on accommodation adjacent to the application site. It should also, as I've also said previously, the dwelling is now within the red line. So that was an issue that was raised last time, but it is now within the red line plan. So the additional information received sets, since the deferral sets out that the 3-mile search radius was selected as 60% of the client base within that area. It's noted that there are limited options for alternative sites that are more sustainable within those search parameters. However, if this radius was slightly increased to 5 miles, a number of towns and settlements such as Axbridge, Cheddar and Highbridge, along with smaller settlements, would be included. Additionally, sites that are outside of but well related to the boundaries of settlements would still be sequentially preferable than the currently proposed location, which is an open countryside. So, sorry, I'll just The original consent for the category buildings carries conditions that intended for the category to only be an ancillary part of agricultural diversification at New Grove Farm and not to be operated as a separate entity. Due to the separation of the proposed building from the main farm, it's not considered that the proposed development could be considered on the same merit as the original consent for the existing category. Therefore, as it has not been robustly demonstrated that the location proposed is fundamental to the operation of the category business, it's considered that the principle of the development does not comply with policy CO1 or D15. Moving on to consideration of visual impacts, the application site is in an isolated rural location, surrounded predominantly by open countryside. The proposal seeks consent for a building that would have an approximate footprint of 453 square metres and a ridge height of approximately 3.7, and would not be in close proximity to any existing buildings. It's noted that there has been an attempt to design the building to mimic an agricultural building, and that the licensing requirements have pushed the need for a building of this size. However, given the number of windows, dimensions, and the relatively isolated location, this is not considered adequate mitigation for the resultant visual impact. Additionally, whilst there is existing mature vegetation, this is not considered to provide adequate screening. If consent were to be granted, a landscaping plan could potentially be secured by condition. However, it's not clear if adequate landscaping could be provided, given that the existing mature vegetation would not adequately screen the site. Moving on to other matters in respect of residential amenity, due to the isolated location, the proposal is not considered to have a detrimental impact on existing residents in respect of overlooking, overshadowing, or overdominance. Environmental Health have reviewed the proposal and have raised no objection. In respect of highway safety, whilst there was an initial objection from Highways, following a further review by the Highways team, this was lifted. And if consent were to be granted, conditions could be used to secure an appropriate access to the highway. The proposed parking provision is also considered to be adequate. Considering ecology, the application site is within the nutrient catchment area for the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar. However, SES is satisfied that the proposal would not result in an increase in nutrient loading. The application is BNG liable, and therefore, if consent were to be granted, a Section 106 and the standard condition would be used to secure this. Overall, the principle of the development is not considered to be acceptable, as the proposal would result in an unjustified development in countryside, with no robust demonstration of the need for this location. The proposal is also considered to result in an unacceptable impact on visual amenity due to the combination of the isolated rural location and the size and scale of the proposed building that would result in a visually dominant addition that would be out of keeping with the rural and open and agricultural character of the site and surrounding area. The additional information received since the deferral is not considered to be adequate to overcome the concerns relating to the principle of the development. The proposal would still result in development in the countryside, which does not rely on a rural location in order to operate. Details of the licensing requirements have been provided. However, this does not fundamentally require a worker to live on site and provide 24/7 cover. A key holder is able to live within a reasonable travel distance, and on-site presence could be provided through shift workers. It's noted that the size of the building has been dictated by the licensing requirements. Nonetheless, it remains that the proposed development would result in a dominant addition that would be visually out of keeping with the surroundings. Therefore, whilst the proposal is not considered to have a detrimental impact on residential amenity, highway safety, or ecology, the application is recommended for refusal for the following reasons. The first proposed reason for refusal is that the proposal would result in an unacceptable development in a previously undeveloped part of the countryside that has not robustly demonstrated a specific locational requirement or justified the need for a rural location. It is therefore considered that the principle of the development does not comply with policies S2, CO1 and D15 of the local plan. The second reason for refusal proposed is that due to the size and scale of the proposed development, combined with the isolated rural location of the application site, it is considered that the proposal would result in a dominant addition that would be visually out of keeping with the rural, open and agricultural character of the site and surrounding area. As such, the development is contrary to policies D2 and D19 of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. We have one speaker on the item, and that is Simon Collier, who I believe is the applicant Paradigm Limited. He'd like to. You have 3 minutes. Just to let you know, we don't have our last timer working today. So Josh here will be timing you. So just let us know when you're ready to start and.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Simon Collier of Collier Planning, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant. Appendix 1 to the new officer report identifies that policy CO1 doesn't state that a functional need has to be demonstrated in order to justify development in the countryside, only that a countryside location is essential. It has been demonstrated that there are no suitable and available premises within the settlement that fall within a justified search area, as explained in Appendix 1, and so the category can't relocate to anywhere that is not deemed to be countryside in policy terms. As well as policy CO1, the National Planning Policy Framework also provides policy support for the application proposals at paragraphs 88 and 89, which state planning decisions should recognise that sites to meet local business and community needs in rural areas may have to be found beyond existing settlements. In response to the officer's updated comments in the new report, the majority of the category's custom comes from within a 3-mile radius, and there are other existing categories operating in areas further away, including within a 5-mile radius. Commercially, it would not therefore be in any way feasible for the category to move to a premises 5 miles away. It has been demonstrated that there are no sites well related to settlement boundaries which are available and suitable for the business, and in any case, only premises within settlement boundaries would be sequentially preferable in policy terms than the application site, as all others, even those well related to settlements, will also be in the countryside if they are outside of settlement boundaries. A countryside location is necessary, therefore, not because of the need for a key holder to be within a distance to deal with out-of-hours issues, but because there is nowhere suitable and available for the category to relocate to within settlement boundaries of the search area. Having established that, the application site is suitable because it is both available and adjacent to an existing dwelling where key holders can deal with issues that sometimes occur out of hours. It clearly isn't realistic for a small business to be expected to employ someone to be on site at all times just to deal with occasional out of hours requirements, as is suggested in the officer report. There have been no objections to the application from any statutory consultees, and there is very clear support from the parish council and the local community. However, the local community will lose this much valued local business without your support for the application this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, okay.
I should have added at the beginning of my presentation that since the publication of the report, 2 further letters of support from third parties have been received, but no additional points are raised that aren't within the existing report.
Thank you. That preempted my question. So thank you. Members. Councillor Slocum.
Well, as you know, I wasn't here for the first one, but I just wanted to ask one question before I carry on. As this has been deferred, why haven't we found out if the applicant was prepared to do landscaping material to screen the site? Because that's been quite a length of time. And I just wondered whether, because of the deferment, was there no way that things could have been got together to perhaps make this a better application?
Thank you, Councillor Slocum. So the reasons for the deferral were set out. If I just go back to them quickly, it was very much, as you say, you weren't here at the meeting. So the focus was very much on the locational requirement and the details of the licensing requirements. If consent were to be granted, a landscaping plan could be conditioned. Is probably what I would.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I don't know, is it on? It's on. Thank you. I spoke at length about this particular application, and I was really pleased that we were granted deferral. I was really pleased. I think that was democratic. One of the points that we made was the size of the building. I think always this building, although it's within the red line, I mean, the size of the building I thought was fundamental. It was a big-ish building. And I'm very sorry to say, I had a long relationship with a very old lady who passed away not so long ago. because she fell in love with my Maine Coon cat, which I handed in to her regularly every week when I was going away on my journeys around the country. And she had a cattery out at West Huntsville. And the feature of her cattery was that it was a double-decker cattery. Every single unit for a single cat had a ramp going up to a double situation. And I noticed these are all single units. And that was why I was so concerned about it. And I thought if we could maybe have made it into a double unit, we'd half the size of the building, which would have made it much more attractive. Was any attempt to contact the applicant to ask them about the size of the building? Because you personally, I can't pick out you personally, but in your report, it mentions item 2 mentioned specifically the size of the building. Was any attempt made to talk to the applicant about? I mean, I produced this double-decker deal. Where you what the heck? But they could reduce the size of the building to create that sort of a smaller building, even half the size of the building. Would that be more suitable, or is that something that was done?
So the reasons for refusal were relayed to the agent a while ago, well, it's several months ago now, because there was a delay as well with ecology and all that. But the reasons for refusal were fed back. I would also say that no pre-app was done on this scheme either. Right.
Well, in that case, our hands are tied. Thank you
Harry,
very
would
much.
you like to?
Yes, certainly, and of course, members will understand you've got to assess the scheme before you rather than an alternative one. But certainly, following the deferral, myself and Amelia did have a meeting with the planning agent about this. Obviously, primarily on the issues for deferral, and you've got the additional information and commentary as a result of that. But also, the message we gave was, look, you've heard the members discuss your application for at least 30 minutes. This is an opportunity to respond. So that the opportunity was there, but you do have to determine what's before you.
Councillor Philmark.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, like last time, again, I'm very much in two minds on this one. I would say thank you to the officer and the applicant, because I think the issues that I'd raised, they have gone away and tried to see what they could do to deal with it. In terms of the size and scale of the building, the report we have in front of us now says, in effect, that's being determined by the requirements of the cattery business. So the size, I don't think we can change too much. In terms of the double decker, you could have a smaller footprint, but if you go up higher, it's going to stand out as much in the countryside from its height. So I think it's literally as broad as it's long. In terms of if we were to go down the route of granting, I think landscaping plan would be important. The red line element has been addressed by bringing the property into the red line. We haven't as yet made a comment about non-fragmentation, which would basically be making sure that if this goes ahead, I want to see those two tied together, because what I wouldn't want to see happen is suddenly say, oh, sorry, the building that was the key holder's building has now been sold off, and now we've got a cattery, we don't want to look after it. We need something else. So that would be something I would be looking for. The search area, I can understand from both. Again, I mean, it's difficult because both the applicant and the officer have made decent comments in that 3 miles. It makes sense for the commercial element of the cattery. As has been said, there are other catteries elsewhere which could, if you went a wider area, you're starting to go into those areas as well. So I can see why it's the 3 that they've looked for, and this is an existing business that is in that general area, and as has been said, we do try and support those businesses where we can. So it is one of those applications where it is very much 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I'm still not fully made up my mind, but I am very grateful that the issues that I raised that particularly concerned me have been addressed. And I'll wait certainly to listen to the rest of the debate before making my mind up on which way to go on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Murphy, I did speak at this at some length from last time round. I was in favour of it then, quite frankly, after seeing this presentation today, I'm still in favour of it now. Yes, the building is big, we can all see that. However, it doesn't really compete on anything else round about it. It's just a building in its own right. And there's no right of way walking across that land or anything like that. So it's not actually getting anybody's way. And it is a business which, yes, we should support in every way. I do recall saying the last time round about this issue of landscaping. And I would think the applicant would be willing to put any landscaping, new landscaping that was required of them just to get this up and running, because I can't see that as being a deal breaker. And as I just said just now, and also, by the way, just one other thing, I do take on the point about being a double decker, but as Councillor Filmer rightly pointed out, that makes the height of the roof go higher, which is not a good thing. If it stays the way it is, yes, it's a long building, we can see that, but it is doable, it is workable. And right now, as I sit here, I am in favour of it, as the same as last time round. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I too have found the deferral really useful for the additional information. And particularly, yes, thank you. I was going to ask for some photographs of the access, and there's mention in the report of a barn and a Girl Guide hut and the access being shared. Can you just take us through those photographs?
Yeah, sure. So it's probably best if I start off with the aerial. So further to, so this sort of, so that's the application site. I can't really see it very well, but where the track is, there's then this Girl Guide camp. Whether or not it's in it remains in use, I'm not entirely sure. So the existing field access would be used to create this vehicular access here. And then if consent were to be granted, Highways recommended some conditions to ensure that this stretch was suitably consolidated, at suitable width, the usual sort of standard access conditions generally. And it is a dead end, I should say as well. So the dead end is the Girl Guide camp.
Thank you. Is there any comments that our highways officer would like to make about this one?
Thank you. Nothing further really. It would be the standard conditions for the consolidation of the surface and to make sure that the access is wide enough for two vehicles to pass.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Thank you again, Chair. In view of the highways comment, which is absolutely stable, absolutely often no problem whatsoever. As before, I did say I'm in favour of this, and I propose that we grant permission. Thank you.
Councillor Slocum.
As looking at this with new eyes, I do appreciate the work that's been done on this by the officer, and I do understand the dilemma that you were in, and absolutely, but I would like to second this application, please, to accept this, but with all with the major conditions that you have said about landscaping and all the things, I think that we could make this work. I think, you know, I think if we can do that together, that'd be great.
I'll just go to Councillor Filmer before we'll talk about the stating down the reasons, because we'll need some policy reasons in there, I would think.
That's right, Chair. I think a steer as to whether members in supporting the scheme should understand is they feel it's compliant with the policies and which one, just give us a hook there, or if it's still contrary but other material considerations apply. So a steer on one or the other is helpful. And then in doing so, if I think if the motion included helpful things like conditions delegated to officers to draw up, but also a section 106 agreement to secure biodiversity net gain and to link the dwelling to the cattery business.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
So what you just said. So yeah, I was going to say, and in terms of policy, I think the argument we could make was that the committee took the view that the 3 mile search that's been carried out shows that there is a need in that area. And that's where it would, I think if we felt that justified it, that at least addresses the policy objection to a degree. But we have a slight difference of opinion with the officers, but we understand where they came from. But certainly the suitable conditions we agree with the officers and the chair. Obviously can't be the vice chair because he's out of the room anyway. But
Thank you. So I am inclined to agree as well. I think hearing the further information and the principle of the development at CO1 seems clearer to me and more reasonable for the requirements that they need to run their cattery well. So I would say if councillors Hendry and Slocum are in agreement that policy CO1 would be the principle of development we find to be acceptable given the circumstances under which they have to operate.
I was also going to add D15 as well, where whilst I use it within my reason for refusal, it does also talk about small scale employment schemes and all of that. So you might also want D15 because you've got the economic factor there that's part of your thinking. Yeah.
And also it could be said that it fits in with rural type buildings as well. So given that, are both councillors Hendry and councillor Slocum happy with that? So we'll cite policy CO1 and D15, and also to add the conditions as stated in consultation with officers, with conditions and securing section 106 regarding the adjacent property and biodiversity clauses and the landscaping. Yeah. So we have the proposal and seconder before us to grant permission. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you for the report and thank you, member. So that takes us on to the next application. We'll just give the officers a moment to vote and to get Councillor Martin back into the room. Thank you.
To was yesterday.
No, I didn't catch it.
Yeah, it's going back to being.
I owe you.
Maybe I help.
It's too much. But I forgive myself. Which was the main thing. Yeah, I missed the window committee before.
Pages 47 to 76. This is the application for land at former Sunset Bridge Primary School, Camp Bridge, Bridgewater. Eleanor, would you like to give us the presentation, please?
Apologies, just sorting out the presentation.
Spark of electrified. That's it. It's way. So, one house goes up on night. I used to fucking head every day. There's a bunch of turn over. Yeah. So they said it was just an issue. So he said at the moment there was fire. He said, it's a certain time. But they all turn up when like 5 minutes fire. It was okay. They were I left after a few hours after work, so it was okay. But
Evacuated half.
everyone just got better.
Well, you got pub.
News from
Well, that's pretty sad for us.
Yeah. So they have the highways people turned up at midnight, because they weren't sure if it was safe. There's a huge, I don't know what you call it, transformer thing. It's right outside Mum and Dad's house. It's my son and Mum and Dad. That gets, there's this huge big thing. It's big like 20 colouring into the ground. And that's you can hear someone big left house. Whole place for
Good afternoon, everyone.
I was very stressed. I was thinking of various areas of that environment.
So this is an outline planning application for, with all matters reserved, except the access, the erection of up to 26 dwellings and a 2-storey office building. The site is at the site of former Somerset Bridge Primary School. So as set out in the delegated officer report, these are the main considerations. So this is the proposed site location. You can see on the left-hand side, there's the aerial view, and on the right-hand side is the site location plan. So it's accessed via the A38 of Taunton Road and accessed via Hamp Bridge, which is to the north of the site. It's also south of the River Parrett, and Stockmore Green adjoins the west of the site. The site is within the settlement boundary, where the principal residential development is considered acceptable. So this is the indicative site layout plan. So this is just to indicate the site can contain 26 dwelling and a proposed office block. Only the access is being agreed under this planning application, with all other matters being reserved for the reserved matter stage. So matters relating to the exact design and layout would be agreed under further consents. So this is the swept path analysis, which shows the access onto from the main highway, the A38 Taunton Road, towards Hamp Bridge. So on the left-hand side, it shows the small tipper access. So it shows that they can do a left turn in one movement. However, they do need to go on the opposite side of the road to complete that movement. On the right-hand side is the large tipper. It shows that it is possible for a large tipper to use that access, although it does have to reverse and then go forward to egress from the site. So this is the photograph of the proposed access of the A38 Taunton Road. So that's the access up to Hamp Bridge. So this is a photograph of the bridge, which is owned and maintained by the Canal and Rivers Trust. So on the left-hand side is the road over the bridge, and on the right-hand side is the bridge from the public footpath that runs under the bridge. So this is some photos of the proposed access track. On the left-hand side, it's approaching the site, and on the right-hand side, it's moving from the site towards the A38. And this is a photograph of the eastern side of the site taken from Hamp Bridge. So this is where the former school buildings were, former playground, and you can see there's rubble on site, and that some of the buildings are still left over. So this is the centre of the site. This is the former school playing field. This is looking westward down the site. And this is taken from the west end of the site, looking towards east from Hamp Bridge. So during the course of the application, we received an objection from Bridgewater Town Council, and that objection was based on the access and egress of the site onto the A38, and also the lack of affordable housing proposed during the scheme. However, the Highway Authority didn't object to the access and egress onto the A38, and they considered it is acceptable subject to a robust construction management plan being submitted and agreed under a condition. Also, the agent has agreed to enter into a Section 106 agreement to secure the affordable housing contributions. We also received an objection from North Heatherton Town. Highway safety and the use of the bridge, which is maintained by the Canal and Rivers Trust. So in the consultation from the Canal and Rivers Trust, they advised that the last inspection of the bridge was taken in 2014, and it was considered that the bridge could take 40 tonnes, and any vehicle that needs to use the bridge that weighs more than that would need to first apply and serve notice on the Canal and River Trust and get their permission before doing so.
In terms of affordable housing, there's a section, we proposed section 160, agree affordable housing. Flood risk, over the course of the application, we did have objections from the Environment Agency, the Lead Local Flood Authority and the Internal Drainage Board. However, the agent has subsequently submitted a lot of extra information and has overcome all those objections. There was also an objection on the overdevelopment of the site. However, we've already agreed under previous unsuccessful applications, that 36 dwellings could be accommodated on the site, and therefore 26 dwellings on the site would be considered acceptable. So we also had a number of neighbour objections relating to the below. So highway safety we previously covered, and flood risk we've also covered. There was also objections based on the office block and the car park being located adjacent to neighbouring properties. However, the exact location of the car parking and the office block would be agreed under reserve matters. And also conditions and mitigation would be considered under the reserve matters application. There was also concerns regarding environmental health and the removal of the existing rubble off site. However, our environmental health officer considered it was acceptable subject to conditions. There was also concerns regarding the public right of way. However, our public right of way officer didn't raise any objections. There was also concerns that it was an unsuitable location and overdevelopment. However, it is within the settlement boundary and in planning terms that is a sustainable location. There were also concerns regarding ecology. However, over the course of the applications on site, there have been a fair few ecology appraisals completed, and they've all considered that it's unlikely to adversely harm biodiversity or ecology, and it will be acceptable subject to conditions. So on balance, the proposal was for 26 dwellings in an established settlement boundary, and we have not identified any conflict with the development plan. The Highway Authority considers the access to be acceptable, and the proposal has overcome previous technical refusal reasons relating to flood risk and ecology, subject to further conditions. The applicant has agreed to secure affordable housing through a Section 106 agreement, and they've also agreed to a financial contribution requested by NHS ICB. Notwithstanding the above, the council was also unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and so the council would need to demonstrate there is demonstrable and significant harm if they were to refuse the planning application. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure 6 affordable dwellings and a financial contribution to the NHS ICB of £16,286, and the conditions set out in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'd like to invite Simon Collier back to the table, please. You are down as the applicant Chapel Estates. Just let us know when you're ready to start and we'll set the timer.
Thank you again, Chair.
Thank you.
Again, I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant on this one. The background to this site is that there is an extant planning permission for 5 dwellings, which was granted in 2015 for the former school field part of the site. Permission was also approved in 2018 for a further 9 dwellings on the former school buildings part of the site. Following those approvals, the applicant was then encouraged by the council to bring forward a combined proposal. The relevant planning history for the site, therefore, goes back further than the applications which are identified in the officer report. The submission of the application before you also followed previous outline applications for an identical application site, which were refused solely due to the need for further information relating to drainage and ecology, which have now been fully addressed. There are no objections to this application from any statutory consultees, including your highways officers, who have been very consistent in their support for all of the proposals for the site. Indeed, none of the previous applications have been refused on highways grounds, despite those previous applications proposing a much larger scale of development. The site has previously been used as a primary school and it is still used for commercial purposes, meaning it has always generated a level of vehicle movement which has been either greater or similar to what the proposals before you will generate. Planning policy seeks to encourage sustainable modes of travel, and the site is within a highly sustainable location which would make walking, cycling and public transport a very attractive option for the proposed residents and will reduce the vehicular movements to and from the site yet further. As the officer report explains, a construction management plan can be agreed to control the nature of vehicle movements to and from the site during the construction phase, which of course is only temporary anyway. Importantly, however, the revisions which have been made to the application to reduce the scale of development means that there would not now be any requirement for soils to either be imported or exported from the site during the construction, which has significantly reduced the number of vehicular movements that will be required to be made by large construction vehicles anyway. The site is within the settlement boundary of Bridgewater, and a large part of it is on brownfield land. The officer report concludes that the proposals are entirely policy compliant and consistent with the development plan. It also recognises that there is a shortfall in the council's housing land supply, which this site can help to address, and that the tilted balance is engaged and weighs heavily in support of the proposals. We therefore request your support for the officer recommendation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, well timed. Before we kick off, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on this one. Can I ask about the 5-year land supply? Because previously we've been told that in this area that we exceeded that requirements, and now it seems to have dropped below. Is there a reason? Can you tell us what the reason is?
Yes, I have to unfortunately confirm that unlike the other 3 areas of the county which were below the 5 years, the north area was until recently above. It's a change in the way that government say that you calculate the standard method, which everyone has to assess their housing need upon, has unfortunately dropped it just below the 5 years, really. I think more of this will come forward at the strategic planning committee in terms of the evidence base, but that's the outcome that is there. So it is a fairly recent occurrence, but it is an actual thing, and therefore because of that, as set out in the report and as Mr. Collier set out in his statement, the tilted balance is now engaged in our decisions in terms of housing within this area. So it's not significantly below 5. It's still the best of the 4 areas within the county. There's not competition, but crucially, it has now dipped below the 5, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, is it Bridgewater or North Petherton? Because you didn't mention North Petherton at all in their report there. In the last paragraph, you said regarding just Bridgewater. I'm a little bit confused. But what I will say is that of school, I attended my first council meeting there about 30 years ago in North Petherton Town Council. A lot of history there. Yes, we have our meetings used to. And this application has been coming to and fro, to and fro, to and fro. It must be that giddy. It's been going around in circles now for what, probably 8 to 10 years. And the biggest problem always suggest with the access onto the A38. It sounds like these things have been addressed now. Like I'm confident in thinking that, yes. And really with the land supply like it is, they have gone under the 5 years, etc., etc. One thing that concerned me, the affordable housing. There was a little bit of a question mark regarding that. Only with builders' costs escalated, the reality of the modern world is that some of these affordable housing ceilings will come down because that is the real world we live in. Costs have escalated so much, and I dread to think how much these applications have gone up since the time they started, to the time they got it to the table now. Well, you want a damn good bank manager, I think, because that's how things have changed. And believe me, I'm involved in some of it, so I know what I'm talking about, of cost and the time it takes, ecology and everything else. So really, I'm glad to see it's coming to fruition, really, because there's been a lot of talk about it at all levels, North Petherton and Bridgewater. And really, I'm just going to sit and listen and pick up any more points I can. The affordable housing needs to be clarified, I think.
Yes, the applicant has agreed to supply 6 affordable dwellings. And so that was identified because it's partially brownfield and greenfield. So that was the policy requirement for 6. And we'll secure that through a section 106 agreement.
Thank you, well, thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions, I think. First one, regarding the bridge itself. In the travel plan, is there any mention of insurance for possible damage to the bridge? With it being a monument, it's not a monument, but the word I'm after. Is there any mention of insurance on the bridge for HGV Acton?
So the Canal and Rivers Trust have asked that they do a photographic survey before they start construction works and then do a photographic survey afterwards to see if there's any damage to the structural integrity of the bridge. And they've asked if we can attach that by condition, and we recommended that, and it's been agreed by the applicant.
Very good, thank you. Sweat path analysis. Why is it so tight for those HGVs? They've got a field. Why have they need HGV to do a 3-point turn there? That's really more me being picky than anything else.
So that's the access onto the A38. If I go back. So, anyone else?
No, it was 2 before that. That one. Yeah, so another 3. We seem to have all the jiggery pokery on the HGV there. Well, why not just make it? Is that the access to the main road?
Yes, the A38
Right.
site.
And so the proposition is for it to do a 3-point turn to get onto the road.
Yes, but for a construction management plan, they would make sure those movements are not in peak times.
Right.
So it'd be really early in the morning.
And presumably with the banksman as well. With the banksman. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Thank you. So there you go. The bridge again, I'm afraid, 40 tons is the proposed maximum. Does that proposed maximum include the tear weight, as in that's the gross weight of the vehicle, not the laden, not the carrying weight?
So that's not the max. So they can, so a vehicle of up to 40 tons can go over the bridge without notifying the Canal and Rivers Trust.
Yeah.
And if it's more than 40 tons, they'll have to serve notice and apply and get their permission to cross the bridge.
That's it. But is it 40 tons of
Gross.
load or gross?
Yes,
Okay.
so it's maximum gross weight. Yeah.
Right, that's lovely, thank you. The 5-year supply, we knew this was going to happen. You gave us that lovely talk about it. It seems so unfair that we're not allowed to take the benefits of the Somerset as a whole plan that's going to come into force, but we still have to pay a penalty before the plan comes into force. We still, but we know that we know that's going to happen. That's just me griping. And with the affordable housing, they have agreed to provide the affordable housing. This is nothing against the applicant or his representative or indeed the agent, but the applicant agreeing to provide affordable housing that sounds very much like Donald Trump agreeing to release tariffs as though he's doing us a favour. If they want to build this thing, they can provide the affordable housing. It's nothing against you, but they don't agree to it. It's what they need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, so if it'd be secured for a section 106 agreement, so we wouldn't grant planning permission until that section 106 is agreed and in place.
Yeah.
So they would have to, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I think the reason we term it that way and have agreed is that policies in terms of delivery of affordable housing always have that wording at the end that we dread, subject to viability. And
Yes.
so it's got to meant in a positive way to say, yes, it's achieved at this stage. So any issuing of outline permission at this stage will include a section 106 agreement to deliver those units. You'll note this is outline, so as the scheme develops, then obviously there's more information in terms of costs and values. And so it could well be the applicant takes another, we will need to review that before they press go on quite a major development.
That's it.
And so, so I think the achievement of affordable housing is positive and we're saying should be taken. And then if it's then a reserve matters application, it's in accordance with that outline permission. If it's something different, then it's something that the committee would consider on its merits at a later stage.
That's agreed. Thank you. That goes back to really what Alan was saying. Sorry, Councillor Bradford was saying earlier, the subject to viability line. You know, if wood costs £1 this week, but £15 next week, all of a sudden the subject line, the subject to viability line comes into action. That's great. Thank you very much. All understood. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer and then Councillor Smedley.
I think part of it was just being covered with the viability stuff, because I mean, it's good that it's in there and it must be in there, but there's no guarantee at this stage that we're definitely getting that until we see what the viability is later down the line. I'm a little disappointed, I must admit, to find we get advised that we've lost our 5-year land supply in a current application. It would have been nice to have given us that heads up beforehand that it had actually happened. And one would ask that if there are other applications that come through that push it the other way, I presume we're monitoring that if this 4.77 can get 1 or 2 of these style of applications through, it might push it back up towards the 5-year land supply. So can we be kept abreast of any changes on that? Because I think it is so critical to us in terms of the decision making, and without being competitive with our other 3 areas, we are the best of the 4 at the moment. So we're the nearest of having the 5 years. So, but it would be helpful to just keep us abreast of how close we can get to that.
And apologies that I've informed you of that in this way at this point in time. Apologies.
The other thing, Chair, if I could, is it possible to have the plan showing the site plan and the layout of the 26? And I know this is only indicative, but I just wanted to understand the site as a whole. There's obviously the office building in the bottom right. Currently, you've got the blue bits, which are the development. You then got what looks like a couple of balancing ponds and a big green lump between them and the housing. Is that designated for anything? Because at 26 housing going on the site is, we're being told, okay, but it looks to me like there's a lot of white space there at the moment. I'm just a little worried that 26 might suddenly come back nearer to 36, and I'd just like to understand how that's being avoided.
So that white area, the Environment Agency requested there was a buffer between the development and Stockmore Green, so they can't build within that area, otherwise they wouldn't get flood defence consent. They also got to raise the land to 5.6 AOD where the housing is, so the land will be raised up where the dwellings are, and it will be at lower ground level where the white space is. They have proposed the children's play area to be in that bit.
That's reassuring that we've got some solidity there, because we've seen it on 1 or 2 other sites in the past where suddenly things proved to be a little bit bigger than we thought they were going to be. You mentioned public right of way, and our public rights of way officer had made a request within there about whether improvements to adjoining public rights of way could be incorporated into the proposal. Have we managed to secure anything towards that?
I did ask the applicant, and they said they weren't proposing any amendments to the public right of way. And I went back to the public rights of way officer, and he didn't object or have any further comments.
One would hope the agent maybe in the room will have a chat with his client, because obviously this will come back for further details if we grant it today. And certainly we're trying to make sure that these source developments connect with their surrounding areas, whether it be North Petherton or Bridgewater, and having right the way they're actually usable would be useful. Again, from experience, there's been 1 or 2 other developments in the past where we've had to fight to get those sorted later down the line, and it can take years if we don't get it sorted with the applicants early on. But other than that, I think where we are is, as the officer has said, it's within the development boundary. There's a lot of things pointing to a positive. I'm still worried about the access, but our highways colleagues are happy it's workable. So we will wait and see. But
Councillor Smedley, then Councillor Slocum.
I just want to address the vexed question of where it is. In fact, it's in North Petherton. The boundary, if you look at that map again, the boundary is the bridge and the road. Bridgewater's the north side of that bridge, and Petherton's the south side of it to the river. The boundary goes from the A38 to the river. But I noticed that the officers haven't mentioned the parish in here. It's left blank, whereas the other ones have got a mention. The previous one was mentioned as Wedmore, the next one's mentioned as Barrow.
So that's not mentioned, yet it says objection from the town council. So it's lucky that both town councils have objected.
For the same reason. Can I just come in with, Councillor Slocum and Bradford, I've got you down to speak, but I just wanted to say something, because I know this site really well, because it was the site of my primary school, actually. And it's been really sad over a number of years to see it looking so shabby and untidy. So it would be good for something to go there, but I have huge concerns about the access. And because it's such an unusual site, it sort of follows the line of the river for some time, and there are a couple of passing bays, but in other areas, there's just no chance of passing because you've got the riverbank there. And I did take a drive up there this morning just to see how it was in my medium-sized Citroen Berlingo to come down and then come down. It's an odd angle as well when you're approaching from the site, the A38, and to pull out left, I did have to stop the and I was being careful. I wasn't trying to make a point. I did have to stop traffic on the other side in order to get out in my little medium-sized saloon car. I know in the reports it mentions there being a school there before, and hence the traffic, the traffic generation. But I do have to say that school was built at, I think, around the turn of the last century, before car ownership. I'm not sure that it would have been granted permission in this day and age. And in fact, the reason the site is derelict is because the school moved because of the size and, I assume, generation of traffic. So, as I said, I do have concerns, and also about talking about the bridge and the weight limits. I mean, if there is a heavier lorry over 40 tonnes and permission is sought, I mean, surely the bridge can either take it or it can't. So I'm a little bit concerned about that sort of rationale. It's either able to take the weight or it isn't. But I'll wait for further comment and debate. Thank you. So we've got Councillor Slocum, Councillor Bradford, and Councillor Hendrick.
Thank you. I'm a little bit. I was feeling sorted, and now I'm a little bit confused. With 24 conditions on this, you've gone that extra mile. It's a good report, and for 24 conditions, it must be something that's really, you've really gone through it with a fine tooth comb. What I wanted to know was it a school with vehicle access before? And how big was the school? And how did they manage? Because I'm the other end of the other end, and I have no idea. Sorry.
That's okay. Yes, it was a school, and the vehicle movements did use the access track. So the extant planning permission for the site is a primary school, and I believe that we've had appeal decisions that have given that significant weight, and that was for the 9 dwellings, wasn't it? So that was a factor that we considered when considering this application as well. That the fallback is that there isn't the extent use of the site is a school, and that would have had vehicle movements using the school every day, and so this development is unlikely to cause as many vehicle movements as the school would have done.
Sorry, can you just tell me what size the school? Sorry, not building. I meant pupil. How many cars roughly do they know?
Based on the appeal decision for the 9 houses relatively recently, the appeal decision was issued in January 2022. The inspector there considered that there would be 270 vehicle movements per day to the school. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Certainly does.
Thank you.
Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Squibbers Way. Too far away, so I've read anywhere in Bridgewater. I just wonder, has everything been looked into regarding maybe an alternative access over on Squibbers Way? People said to me, really, that's really the obvious place for it, but there must be reasons why it can't happen. And you put all the stops up, but by appeasing everyone regarding the junction on the A38, which is not easy, but obviously there'll be improvements and we'll make it better. But has it been explored? Scribber's Way.
Certainly from a highways point of view, we can only assess what's put in front of us as a planning application, and this planning application comes off the A38 rather than off Scribber's Way. So I haven't considered Scribber's Way as an access point because that's not the access point in front of me.
I understand totally what you're saying, but sometimes, not with knowledge is paramount sometimes.
Can, councillor Hendrick?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, here's where we are. Watched the presentation, which I think was first class. Everything's good with that. I actually have read up quite a bit on this here, which just strengthens my view here is two things: the 270 car movement. That really has gone a long way. Statutory consultees are all on board, but for me, on this particular occasion, more so highways than anything else. They serve matters with us at the moment. Okay, it's fine. I have to assume everything else is okay because I don't actually see a problem that would stand in the way of this and have a refusal. So right at this moment in time, I actually say we go with the officer and grant permission. Thank you.
Councillor Slocum.
I have to say, if I may, the 270 car movements bought it for me. Because I use the road a lot and I've used the road at school times, and I think if it had that amount of traffic coming out, this is obviously going to be a lot better. Even if 26 houses have 3 cars each, it's still going to not be as bad as what it was. So and I think you have been extensively 24 conditions. You've gone really as far as you can go. So I do feel confident. I think that you've done everything you can. So I'd like to second the proposal, please, to pass the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder to grant permission. All those in favour, please show.
Yeah.
So we've got 9? Yeah. So that's 9 for those against, please show. 2, and I think that's everybody, so there'll be no abstentions. So that is passed. Thank you, members. Thank you. So we now go on to the final application of the afternoon, and that is agenda item 7, pages 77 to 84, Julian's Acres at Barrows.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the infilling of a front opening and the repositioning of a front door at 39 Julian's Acres. The main considerations for this application are policy D2, D14, D25 of the local plan, and also the parish council objection. Here you can see the location plan of the site with the property outlined in red, and also an aerial Google Maps view of the properties shown in the yellow ring. Here you can see the existing and proposed block plan. They look very similar, so the proposed is to one side and the existing to the other. Here are the existing floor plans. You can see that there's the garage detailed on there, and the front opening is shown without any of the grey around the outside. And here are the proposed floor plans. These are the existing elevations and the proposed elevations. Here are the site photos taken from the front of the dwelling house. And also there's another picture of the front of the dwelling house, and also a 2009 Google Maps image. That was the most recent one that they actually had. So the specific issues are detailed here. In regard to visual amenity, the proposal is seen to be of an appropriate scale, design and detailing to respect the local area, and it will also be finished in matching materials to the existing property. In regard to residential amenity, the proposal is unlikely to have a negative impact on the residential amenity of the occupiers of the dwelling or of the residential amenity of the neighbouring dwellings. In regard to highway safety, the parish council have objected to the application in regard to potential loss of parking. The proposed number of bedrooms will not be increasing as a part of this proposal, and there will be the loss of the garage parking space. However, this is just over 2.1 metres, and highway standing advice for the width of a garage parking space for vehicles is at least 3 metres in width. So it's not seen to conform to current standing advice for highways. So it is officers' opinion that there is not any parking to be lost via this proposal. And in this location, a 4-bedroom house is optimum parking levels would be 3.5 spaces, and it is considered that there would be space for this on the site. This Barrow is a tier 3 settlement and is in close proximity to the tier 1 settlement of Burnham-on-Sea, and it's therefore considered that there is access to public transport such as buses and trains. Overall, in planning balance, it's considered that design would not adversely harm the character of the area. The residential amenity is unlikely to be significantly affected, and overall the proposal is not causing the loss of a usable parking space. Therefore, also one update since this was submitted. When I did my site visit on Friday last week, it was clear that some works had commenced. However, it is considered that these would, from what we could see, be permitted development, so would not need consent at this time. So we therefore recommend that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions shown on screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Freya. No speakers on this one. Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Filmer.
Sure. I know Jewel's Acres extremely well. It's not very far from me. There are several houses down there that is exactly the same, if not exactly the same, very, very similar indeed. I don't know why anybody could vote against this or even try to vote against that. I've got no idea. It doesn't impede on anybody. With the loss of a garage, it should be noted here that the size of the garage nowadays, in fact, we only had this conversation yesterday, size of garages nowadays haven't changed, I think, since the 1970s. And very few people actually park their cars in garages anymore because they just don't fit in there. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. So most people now use a garage as a storeroom. So if they want to convert the garage into something else, so be it, that you're not actually losing a parking space because it wasn't used as one in the first place. So no, I just do not see a problem. I wouldn't understand why anybody would actually go against this. I have no idea. Thank you.
Councillor Filmer.
I'll be free to possibly disagree with Councillor Hendry, but in actual fact, I don't disagree with the recommendation. I can understand exactly where our case officer has come from, and I'm really chuffed to bits that we have a highways officer here today. My concern is the highways advice, and I totally understand where Councillor Hendry has come from in terms of the 1970s and the size of cars. Could we possibly put up a picture which had the street view a few years ago? Because
yeah, I would just like to say that although it appears as if that vehicle would fit in, it's actually slightly skewed to the side, and you'd have to pull in the wing mirrors, but you can't see them on the image. I just thought I'd make that clear. They're not visible, but they are there.
yeah, I think my slight concern is paragraph 11.6. It says that current garage is not suitable for modern cars. I mean, I don't drive a Model T Ford, but I do drive something that's not an SUV or a Range Rover or a Jaguar. And 3 meters is 10 foot wide. And if we are now saying that no garage that's less than 10 foot counts as a parking space, we are opening up an interesting can of worms across the whole of the county. Because if we can say that any space that's less than 10 foot opening doesn't count as a parking space, and we therefore can take it away and we don't lose a parking space, in both urban and rural areas, we are going to create an awful lot of congestion on the streets, because almost every garage is not going to be more than a 10 foot wide opening. So I just wonder why we've set that as our standard to say anything under 10 foot wide doesn't count as a parking space, because as I say, I think it could really come back to bite us with a number of other ones which people will come forward for conversions, and understandably, because as I said, it's another room that you can add to your building, but it is really going to put pressure on parking across the streets, which is something that a lot of us have problems with already. So I would dare say, we'd be interested to know why highways have picked 10 foot wide as an opening, because most modern cars, if they're not an SUV, still can fit into something a bit smaller than 10 foot wide and open their doors and get out.
Thank you for a slightly curved ball question. Why highways have chosen 10 foot wide as their standard? It was based on a Ford Cortina, is the honest answer. The internal dimensions of a garage as required today and the dimensions of a parking space as required today are based on a Ford Cortina. They need updating, and highways are the first to admit that they need updating. But at this current time, that is the internal dimensions of a garage is 6 meters by 3 meters, so 10 foot thereabouts. I could give you a very geeky website that will show you the number of cars, of today's cars, that won't fit in that garage. I could also direct you to a paragraph within Mail Streets that says that only 44% of garages actually get parked in. Personally, I'm not convinced that 44 is the right number. I think it's significantly lower than 44%. Anybody that I know with a garage doesn't park in it. They've got the chest freezer in there, they've got the bikes in there, they've got storage in there, etc. As a highways officer, I obviously have to go with our guidance and have to accept garaging, but I'm not the biggest fan of garaging without the removal of permitted development rights for that very reason. But any site now that hasn't got the permitted development rights removed could convert their garage tomorrow without coming in front of you, as I understand it.
Any other members wishing to speak? Councillor Hendry.
If I could have considered, I'm happy to go with the officer and the commission.
Is there a second?
No, we don't double accent.
Yeah.
We're very similar minds.
Make my next very easy.
Seconded by Councillor Slocum to grant permission. All those in favour, please show. And I think that is unanimous. Yes, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the application this afternoon. Gary, will you be taking us through the appeal reports?
I certainly will, Chair. There's quite a lot of reading to do this time around. So if you bear with me, I'll cover them as quickly as I can with headlines. I know there are two in particular that we should focus on, and I'm doing these in the order where they're set out in your papers. So happy to kind of be asked any further questions with regard to this. So this is a high-level summary of them, really. So starting off with Beaufort House, 7 Rectory Road, Burnham-on-Sea. I believe that was a committee case in May last year, so just before I personally started at the council. I understand that was a committee overturn where officers have recommended approval and members decided to refuse permission. So as you'll see there, the appeal has been allowed. And the inspector, in looking at this proposal, felt that contrary to the reason for refusal, that the development wouldn't constitute overdevelopment, nor would it be harmful to the character and appearance of the area. And the inspector felt that the design and the scale of the development to be suitable and appropriate in its local context. Because it was, I think, of a development around existing kind of hard surfaced area. The inspector felt that, acknowledged that whilst the building would be more visible than what was there at the moment and would appear across a much wider span than the existing garage and shed structures that were there at the site, felt that it wouldn't be unduly imposing or visually dominant in the outlook. I know that's often, quite a subjective view to take. So it's quite telling that costs weren't applied for and therefore certainly weren't awarded. So it's one of those legitimate subjective points I think we're talking about here, really. And looking at the impact on neighbours, the inspector felt that whilst the proposal would introduce some change along the boundary, it wouldn't describe it as wouldn't be demonstrably different in terms of its amenity implications, and then conclude that it's satisfied that the appeal proposal would not have any unduly harmful impacts on the living conditions of neighbouring residential properties. That's why the inspector allowed that appeal. Then the second one, which is 6 Brook Lane, just remind myself what the development was on that one. So I'm flitting between a couple of documents here just to try and summarise all of this. Right, here we go. So this was a proposal for the approval of reserved matters for 2 dwellings, following the grant of outline permission. It's a delegated decision. The appeal was dismissed, so the refusal was upheld. And this is one I know we looked at as officers at our case review session as well, which is where there was outline consent for a couple of dwellings. There was an informative on the outline decision to say that that the ridge heights, we'd be supportive of ridge height at a single story level, but the applicant came in with 2-story developments. The inspector acknowledged that and said that was important, and just the granting of 2 units an outline wasn't a kind of a shoe-in really for two-story dwellings, and the inspector felt that 2-story dwellings would be a bit out of character and would actually impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties as well. So that one was dismissed. Turning to the one that I'm sure Councillor Phil was quite interested in, and you all will as a committee quite rightly. And I think this was considered at my first committee here back in July last year. This was, it's one of 2 applications. We're still waiting for the second decision, but this was one at Rookery Manor in Edingworth Road, Edingworth. And this was the proposal to put more kind of holiday lodges stroke cabins on the more southern elements of the wider site, and officers had recommended approval, and the committee resolved to refuse permission based upon the kind of visual impact of that development, and also that future occupiers could be exposed to excessive noise from the adjacent M5. And the inspector agreed with the committee members. The inspector felt that when viewed from most directions, the rows of cabins will appear as a notable intrusion into the open countryside, which the inspector felt would be harmful to the landscape character and appearance of the area. Also, the inspector felt that based on the evidence before them, that it had not been demonstrated that future occupants' living conditions would be acceptable with regard to the effects of motorway noise. So one for the committee there, definitely.
Any surprise? Can I ask why?
No, I'm not surprised, because you are always open to make a decision that's different for the officer recommendation. It's having those legitimate reasons. And so the first one, where that had happened, but the inspector kind of followed the officer advice and granted permission, it was on areas that were legitimate and subjective. So, it was fine. There's not a hint of cost there. And then with Rookery Manor, again, it is to a degree subjective whether something adjacent to a development is harmful. And in this case, this inspector Welcome back, Councillor Flanagan. And then, so the next one then was a delegated decision at 9 Portman Crescent, North Pedderton. Let's check what that one was for. That was for various extensions to a house. Very quickly, the inspector on that one felt that the development would be overbearing and harmful to the living conditions of neighbouring properties. So that was fairly straightforward one. The next one to the north of Bush Lane, Spaxton, that was under delegated powers. That was dismissed as well. This was a prior approval for agricultural building into a dwelling. The inspector looked at all the evidence and the arguments of both sides, considered that all 4 elevations would be rebuilt in their entirety. So, you know, in order to qualify for permitted development prior approval, there's got to be a building there, you know, to convert. And the inspector wasn't convinced of that and said, pardon?
That's name the applicant.
The applicant, yeah. Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Burland. Yeah. Yeah, so the inspector remarked, in the absence of a structural survey, including detailed information as to the condition, etc. of the building and the extent of works which may be required to enable its use as a dwelling house, it is not clear that the existing building is suitable for conversion to residential use. Therefore, it failed the requirement for prior approval. Then the next one was the address of just Barn at West Ham in Wedmore. That was for a new self-built dwelling through conversion and extension of an existing agricultural building. Another development too. That was decided on delegated powers, but in that case, the inspector allowed the appeal, so disagreed with the council's point. Inspector said the main point of dispute between the parties is whether the proposed development amounts to infilling of the existing settlement or whether it physically extends the built form into the countryside. And I think this site was in the middle of that particular hamlet and seemed to have attached quite a bit of weight to that really, and was satisfied that the proposal would comply with requirements of the policy, was satisfied that it would also be a self-build development as well, and would not extend development into the open countryside, and the development would be a scale and nature which would be appropriate to the site character and identity of the existing community. Again, that kind of thing is quite subjective, but we lost the argument on that one. And not quite there yet. The next one is 17 Coombe Batch Rise in Wedmore. That was for this is again a prior approval for an upward extension of existing dwelling, which I think when government brought this in, I think a lot of us just feared it would just be a tick box exercise to allow existing dwellings just to have an existing story added, and you'd have this hodgepodge of additional height without any real control. But there was a legal case a few years ago that actually said that there's more of a planning judgment involved than just in a box in terms of prior approval. I think the courts weren't a fan of the legislation. And so in this case, it was also refused on the delegated, and it was dismissed, and the inspector felt that converting a single-storey house to a two-storey house randomly in the streetscape, it just looked completely out of place, really. And an anomalous feature which would disrupt the uniformity of building heights in the row and within the cul-de-sac. Inspector agreed with us there. And finally, although ending on a negative note, 138 Wendon Hill, Wendon, delegated decision, appeal allowed though. This was for what's it for? Oh, it's a two-storey extension to the rear of the property. We had refused it, but in general, the inspector felt that it was acceptable and that it wouldn't have a detrimental impact on the neighbouring property with regards to outlook, sunlight or privacy. So a lot of decisions there. one or two, learning points, nothing to be too sore about in terms of costs or things like that. And, I think in terms of performance, in terms of appeals, successfully defended is sort of within that there really. I think some you win the important ones, the ones you lose weren't particularly significant, I would say. Happy to take any further questions.
Interesting lessons there. Then Councillor Filmer.
The one relating to the decisions, and that's fine, going back to Rookery Manor. In the write-up that the inspector gave, he also seemed to make some comments along the lines that there appeared to be works that have been carried out on the ground when he went out to visit the site, which shouldn't be there. And he, in as about as couched his words very carefully, but he pretty much said you ought to go out there and do some enforcement. Have we, and are we? And while you're out there, you might want to have a look around because there are some other items out there that need to be looked at. But he did seem to give us a very strong steer in his decision that we should be taking a look at that site.
Yes, the honest answer that we haven't actioned that yet, but we will do now. Now we've got to have the appeal decision in. Now we've reported it to committee. We'll share that with our enforcement colleagues. Thanks for highlighting that.
Chair, can I ask one further question? You mentioned prior approvals. A number of parishes, certainly in Tony and my patch, have raised with us the fact that there seem to be an awful lot of prior approvals suddenly coming through. Have we noticed a change? Because it seems to be a way that people are trying to fast track the system. And I don't know whether this is just peculiar to our neck of the woods or whether it's something more widely across the patch. But there seems to be a lot more prior approvals coming through.
Yeah, I haven't seen any data. It's the applications that we regularly see that weekly case review amongst the officers because everyone's different. It's really common across a lot of rural areas, really across the whole of Somerset. Definitely, I see a large number of the ones in this patch and also in West, and there's equal numbers there. And I think there is in South and East as well. I think the legislation was changed a little while ago, though, so it's not a sudden surge in response to legislation that's, where the ink's barely dry. I think it's a number of years old, actually. I just think it's one of those trends that sometimes certain types of development get pushed rather than others, really. So, yeah, I mean, back in the day, it used to be like a prior approval, used to be barn conversions. There used to have to be really solid, attractive looking building. Now it just has to be a building basically, and even then, people will push that argument. So we've got lots in. There'll be more to come because there's a real value. You can see that obviously real value. The more houses we get, the better. Hopefully in sustainable locations. But there's real value in people who actually own one of these buildings to get that converted to residential. There's a real incentive to do that, really. And prior approval is a kind of like a fast track route to get there.
Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to make a comment because I'm delighted to hear that there were no costs to be paid on the Beaufort House application. I think that was poetic justice in some ways, but I am disappointed because partially because of your comments about the second item. You spoke about a double story, and if you may recall that the Beaufort House situation was where the buildings that were going to be put up behind the two houses that would be affected would be 18 feet high, and the wall I checked afterwards is 6 feet high. So they were actually getting 12 feet of wall placed above their wall as they stepped out of their door. So they stepped out of their door, all they saw was the wall, and behind it, some distance away, the main building. And they have just been given permission to build a further 18 feet up, which essentially is a double story. I mean, I know we're talking about double story today. Essentially a double story, which is exactly your point. For the second item, it's where the bedrooms are in the second story. They have to be, because otherwise not. So, and the second point was, when I heard, I was shocked to hear that the appeal had been, I suppose, ratified. And I phoned the officer, which will remain nameless, to ask him what were the criteria? And he said, well, there was no, I said, because obviously the parking was a major issue. This is me making the point, the parking is one issue. What happened with that? Oh, well, I don't recall the parking, he said. But he did say that the applicant produced a new plan for parking. And I just wanted, from my own point of view, I wondered, is that a valid thing to do for an inspector to be looking at a new plan for parking, which has not been seen by us, has not been discussed, is not a part of the decision-making process, and is therefore not democratic. So I would just like to say, I mean, if I at the time thought to myself, do we have any powers to call something in? I mean, obviously, I wouldn't want to call it in if there's a risk of what do you call it, fees being paid by the person who's in the house, the houses. But the other point we made was I cannot tell you how many nursing homes there are in that 150 yards of 200 yards of road with junctions, etc., which is a nightmare to pass because every time you go, there'll be a van coming hurtling down, completely blind. It's an accident waiting to happen. So I just wondered. I assume that we have no right to reply, and I thank you very much for listening to my dive. So there you are. But I feel it was unjust.
The only challenge we would be able to make would be a legal challenge to review.
Oh, here we go.
And there'd have to be an error in law. We couldn't just say we agree. And planning inspectors are usually well versed in not falling into that trap.
Well, thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to speak.
On the question about additional plans, I mean, looking at the decision, the inspector didn't give he skirted over the parking issue quite quickly, I think, in the decision. In terms of new plans or amended, documents, that inspectors do entertain them from time to time, and there are legal tests that they have to apply before doing so. Really, if it's a real significant change, and if anyone would be really prejudiced by not being consulted on that, then inspectors are reluctant to accept new plans. But if it's something that's like a clarification or something like that, then quite often they will accept new plans as long as the main development is the same. Like, you can't say, oh, all of a sudden it's another 2 units, we want to chance our arm a little bit. An inspector would never accept that. But from experience, especially if it's an inquiry or a hearing where everyone's in the room and the appellant's saying, oh, I'm tabling this, it's quite hard to push back on that, really. Yeah. And in this case, I think it was written reps, but the inspector accepted it. But it's not very satisfactory for all the reasons you set out, but it does happen. Right.
Sorry to hear
that. Thank you. If there's no further comments, I'd like to thank all members and officers for contributions this afternoon, and now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.